So we'll begin with John 8, and we will try to get through 8 and well into 9, if not finish 9. So does someone want to start reading?
Certainly. Then each of them went home, while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring to him against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard this, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again."
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that last line.
Well, but what does sin mean in John?
Yep.
Well,
So do not be separated from God again. And so that's my question.
okay.
Okay, so for her being caught in adultery, what does that mean for a woman? What was she even doing wrong? Probably nothing.
Well, depends, because the guy, back then they didn't do anything to the guy.
Well, right, that's the thing. So if a woman was caught in adultery, does it mean that she was...
Might have been that she was the married one, and the guy could have been married too. But guys could
Property.
get around with much more. She was another man's property, and therefore she's the one who is really the offender here.
But that man could have been abusing her, and she couldn't divorce him, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we have no idea what the story is. And that's what's fascinating. I had an insight in this story because I've always liked Jesus's response to this. But if you think of what are the themes in the Gospel of John, and they're about connection with God. And it's very common, especially in the Old Testament, to talk about a relationship with God as being a covenant or a marriage. Mm-hmm. And when you cheat on God, you're committing adultery. So this may be an interesting example where the Pharisees are so caught up in the delicious sin of sexuality, right? We get so excited about that. Who's sleeping with who? And how delicious and exciting to bring her out in front of everybody and stone her, and it's such an externalizing of the sin. And you see this all the time, and you see this in the evangelical church too, how they just condemn people, and never condemn like people hoarding wealth, right? They condemn the sexy stuff.
Yeah.
And then but they never look at their own self. And I wonder if this is the story where Jesus is almost saying, isn't it interesting how you can see the sin in someone else, but you can't see that you're disconnected, that you're committing adultery from God? By what? What are you committing adultery with God with? The law? Maybe? Can you make an idol of the law? Yes, I think you can. Can you make an idol of the Bible? Yes, you can. And so when he tells her, go and sin no more, don't sin again, I think that's a larger sentence to say that this is about connection with God and staying connected with God. And
I'm just thinking, too, I could argue, well, I tithe 10% of my 1,000,000 denarii a year. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, the average wage is 1 denarii, daily wage. Mm-hmm. That, so they're keeping the law.
Yeah.
And yet living very finely.
Mm-hmm.
And why is he writing in the ground? What is that about? It just seems random. Like, okay. We don't know. Okay.
I've wondered, too.
Yeah, I've never heard a interpretation on that. Everybody finds it fascinating.
Maybe he's drawing fish.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, they just said it was a example of that he was probably educated which would have been unusual for a carpenter if that's what he was.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
but yeah, the fact that Jesus refuses to get in their mindset of, let's burn the witch, right? Let's burn the witch and make ourselves feel better. And he's like, let's not, and turn this a little bit. All right, you want to read the next section?
Would you read?
Sure. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Then the Pharisees said to him, You are testifying on your own behalf. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus answered, Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, because I know where I have come from and where I am going. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is valid, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of 2 witnesses is valid. I testify on my own behalf, and the Father who sent me testifies on my behalf. Then they said to him, Where is your Father? Jesus answered, You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, but no one arrested him, because his hour had not yet come.
It's a really heavy claim if you think about it. I mean, how would we respond to somebody who is a public figure who is talking this way?
Yeah.
I mean, we clearly have doubts, and the only thing that might, as he's kind of saying, what are you seeing in me? Like, shouldn't it be evident by my actions that I'm valid?
Well, one came close by saying in his mind, he's never sinned. Remember that? Donald Trump never thought he needed forgiveness because he's never sinned.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that's pretty getting close.
But even the Pope, they say the Pope is infallible, and doesn't
Yeah.
that mean he hasn't sinned, and that's not...
No, mea culpa every Lent.
Yeah.
They know it's an understanding, but at the same time, they're honest about it. No, my response is, he goes to the mea culpa, it's me alone, right?
Yeah.
I'm culpable. And so that's in there too. But here, it just said when you said that, and it just sparked in my mind, I still remember Trump saying that he never needs forgiveness because he doesn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. So I don't know of any leader who's ever said that. And I don't even think Jesus says he doesn't do anything wrong. He just says that he's connected to God and he's doing God's will. And of course, the definition of sin in the Gospel of John is that connection or disconnection. It's not moral perfection. But, I mean, if you lined up people like Gandhi and Mother Teresa and all of these great people and said, do you sin? They'd be the first ones to say, of course, of course.
Yeah.
But their connection with God is evident by the impact of their life. And I think that's what Jesus is saying is like, I mean, I don't need witnesses because can't you see? Can't you see that I'm connected with God? And if you can't see it, will 2 witnesses even make a difference?
You mentioned Gandhi. Dr. E. Stanley Jones was a missionary to India. He was this is years ago. I think he was Methodist or Presbyterian, whatever. The point is, he had a conversation with Gandhi, and Gandhi supposedly said, I like your Christ. I like Jesus. I don't like Christians.
Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah.
Again he said to them, I am going away, and you will search for me, but you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. Then the Jews said, is he going to kill himself? Is that what he means by saying, where I am going, you cannot come? He said to them, you are from below, I am from above. You are from this world, I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins, for you will die in your sins unless you believe that I am he. They said to him, who are you? Jesus said to them, why do I speak to you at all? I have much to say about you and much to condemn. But the one who sent me is true, and I declare to the world that I have heard from him, what I've heard from him. They did not understand that he was speaking to them about the Father. So Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will realize that I am he, and that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own. But I speak these things as the Father instructed me, and the one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I am always do what is pleasing to him. And as he was saying these things, many believed in him.
We are starting to enter into a section that has been used very anti-Semitically, because people have misunderstood the fact that the Gospel of John was written. It's a very Jewish gospel that highlights all the festivals and a lot of themes that are very highly Jewish. This is an intra-Jewish fight. It's like, I use that example. It's like you might not like your brother because he's annoying when you're a kid, and you pick up on him all the time. But then when you are out on a playground and you see someone picking on your brother, no, you're not going to abide that. And that's what this was. This gospel came out of the pain of separation of families and their belief system. And it is not Christians against Jews. And so it's really important when we're reading this to not say that Jesus is condemning the Jewish people and that there's like the Christians who believe in Jesus and that, no. They were all people, and he's talking specifically to those who don't believe in him, which could be anybody. And those who did believe in him were Jews. So it's just good to say that, which again is why we try to change Jews to Jewish leaders, because it's really who he's talking to, rather than all the people. I'd like to say if the gospel writers or New Testament writers knew some of the interpretations we've made of their words, they probably would have had notes on the bottom. But they didn't think in 2,000 years in a completely different continent there would be people reading their words.
Context, they wrote to their understanding.
They wrote to their context,
And the story they wanted to tell.
Yeah. So I'll pick up this section here. Then Jesus said to the Jewish leaders who had believed in him, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. They answered him, we are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free? What an odd claim, right? Never been slaves. Jesus answered them, very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. Yet I know you are descendants of Abraham, yet you look for an opportunity to kill me, because there is no place for you in my word. I declare what I have seen in the Father's presence. As for you, you should do what you have heard from the Father. They answered him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to him, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing what Abraham did. But now you're trying to kill me, a man who's told you the truth that I heard from God. Is this not what Abraham did? You are indeed doing what your father does. They said to him, we are not illegitimate children. We have one Father, God himself. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I come from God and now am here. I did not come on my own, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? Is it because you cannot accept my word? You are from, this is the triggering one, you are from your father the devil, and you choose to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks according to his nature, for he is the liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is from God hears the word of God. The reason you do not hear them is that you're not from God. So I'm going to pause there, because this isn't talking about their origin. To me, I feel this is more like, what story are they believing in? The story of God, or the story of the world which is dominated by violence and black and white, us, them, that's very easily infiltrated and influenced by, whether you call it the powers of darkness, ego, devil, whatever it is, not good for us, right? Not in our best interest. And to me, that's a lot easier to say because I don't think it helps us to try to use language of you are from the devil and you are, I don't know. That's my thought.
Well,
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, and Jesus is referencing the devil. So does he mean Satan? Like who's he even talking about? Because at this point, there wasn't a concept of the devil the way we think of him, right?
It was definitely starting in Jesus' time. The note here says the harsh language indicates the intensity of the conflict between the Jewish Christian community for which John was written and the synagogue authorities. It just indicates deep, deep pain to use that harsh of language. But yeah, the devil, Satan, was a concept that they had in the New Testament, but Old Testament not so much.
My recollection is like in the book in Job, and that the one we call the evil one is a tempter. But really isn't inherently evil, because still who created the devil? Yeah, it's interesting. It's we can get into those discussions, but again, there appears to be a sort of the Babylonian captivity, and those gods, because they had a devil in the Babylonian god, whatever it was again. What do you call those again? But yeah, pantheon of gods. That's a Greek word, Roman word, but it's still they had a devil. And it's believed that they started to pick up on that concept so that the tempter becomes eventually more evil than he was before, at least in the minds of those who were thinking that way. That's what we believe. Again, that's what I learned. I don't know what you learned. Right?
Well, I learned it was a kind of a Roman Greek influence, and it was about the time when the Greeks came and that about the Maccabees time, a couple hundred years before.
The Platonic ideals.
When I forget his name, Antiochus, he did stuff that they just could not justify this coming from God or being a punishment from God. And they started to say, no, this guy's like working for a different team. And that's when they started to formulate the concept that there was a power that was opposing God rather than all things come from God. We just have to figure out why. So then by the time Jesus was born, there'd been a couple generations, there'd been a couple hundred years where they'd started to formulate the concept of Satan and the powers of darkness, which are in opposition to God. But it's still a pretty heavy claim to say someone is from the devil.
Right.
Well, they make movies about that to make money.
But for Jesus to say it, that's something.
And we have to take it with a grain of salt because we do want to remember this was written in a context and not 100% of the words that Jesus says in the four Gospels actually directly came from his mouth. And that might make people uncomfortable because then you're like, well, what did he say?
Yeah.
But it's
That's
good
why you
for us.
read it with the Spirit.
Yeah.
The Jews answered him, "Are we not right in saying you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly I tell you, whoever keeps my word will never see death." The Jews then said to him, "Now we know you have a demon. Abraham died, and so did the prophets, yet you say, whoever keeps my word will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, you claim to be? Okay. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died? The prophets also died. Who do you claim to be?" Jesus answered, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me. He of whom you say he is our God, though you do not know him. But I know him. If I would say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your ancestor Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, Very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple.
Yeah, that's going to make them mad. It's like, I mean, Jesus isn't afraid. Isn't that interesting? I do find it interesting that Jesus doesn't do anything out of fear. And the gospel at the same time does say that Jesus is going to die when he wants to die.
Right.
That's a huge thing in John. So even though they're going to throw him or stone him, he somehow magically hides himself. That's just because they're trying to say that Jesus' death was in his control rather than something that we blame on someone else.
Okay, should I go?
Yeah.
As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back, able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, Is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some were saying, It is he. Others were saying, No, but it is someone like him. He kept saying, I am the man. But they kept asking him, Then how were your eyes opened? He answered, The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, Go to Siloam and wash. Then I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, He put mud on my eyes. Then I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. But others said, How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, He is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. Jewish leaders, probably. For the Jewish leaders had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, He is of age, ask him. So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, Give glory to God, we know that this man is a sinner. He answered, I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him, saying, You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Then they answered him, You were born entirely in sins, and you are out trying to teach us? And they drove him out.
Yeah, this is interesting.
It's just almost comical.
Yeah, yeah.
It is comical, like, that no one believes what this guy is saying. They just keep going around and around and around.
Mm-hmm. This is an interesting contrast to in chapter 5 when Jesus healed the paralyzed man who was trying to get into the pool. Because when the Pharisees ask the paralyzed man, he just kind of shrugs.
Yeah.
You know, he's just like, I don't know. Here, this blind man really goes for it.
Yeah.
And he's like, this is a really funny thing. You guys are supposed to be the smart ones. But let me work this out for you. And I have written here as a note, it's like, if A equals B and B equals C, then C equals A. And so he's spelling it out. He's like, a miracle comes from God. Jesus does a miracle, therefore, Jesus comes from God. No, that cannot be. So therefore, a miracle must not have happened. They're just so set on the fact that you must be a liar because it couldn't be. Yeah. Because to admit a miracle happened would be to admit that Jesus was from God. And they can't do that because they're so frustrated with him.
Well, yeah, and like then to ask his parents, like even if his parents had wholeheartedly agreed, they wouldn't have believed them either. Yeah. They're just trying any way they possibly can to disprove what just happened.
Yeah. I have to share a quick thought that came to mind as we read through this, how Jesus opens his eyes. When you give communion, here's mud in your eye. Just a thought.
Well, and healing services, think about that. Yeah. That was apparently a technique. I remember learning that people who were healers, because there were healers that were in the world, they would sometimes use spit and mud as one of their healing tools.
I don't remember learning that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, we got what more? One paragraph left?
We're doing really well today.
Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him. Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. He said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, surely we are not blind, are we? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would not have sin, but now that you say we see, your sin remains.
And of course, this is all metaphor to be able to see who Jesus is. And if you are connected with God, you're able to see God working in other people and recognize it. Like recognizes like. And that's all it is. It's interesting. He says over and over again, I didn't come to judge. And then here he says the judgment is that those who do not see and see, and those, yeah. It's interesting.
And he says in the previous part, my Father judges.
Yeah.
So it's like there is judgment. But what is the actual word, too? Like, I think I remember hearing judgment in the original language this was written in doesn't have the same connotation as the way we think of judgment. Like, is it more like...
I do know that judgment could mean also judge the righteous.
Righteousness,
Yeah, and defend the poor was an Old Testament concept. So that judgment was also something to be embraced, because judgment was, you are not, you're okay.
Right. We hear judgment and we immediately think, like, you're bad, you're going to be punished. But I don't know that was how it was meant.
I think it sort of depends on the context. I know later Paul uses a lot of imagery that's very Greek and from court things. So this wouldn't necessarily be that. That's a really good question, because I think overall when we talk about judgment and justice of God, it's very different from what we do as humans. Because if you think about it, like, God knows us so well. And when you hear about somebody who's maybe doing bad things, and then you hear about their childhood, and then all of a sudden you feel pity for them, and you're like, oh, well, this person shouldn't be out doing whatever they want to, but they really need help.
Yep.
What would help them? Well, that would be judgment. The judgment would be, this is a person who needs help, and this is the things that would rehabilitate them back to being a full human. For some people who just want to see, sinners burn, stone the woman, that doesn't feel good enough, but I think that's much more in line with what God's judgment is.
Yeah, and that's what I've learned too, is that anytime you read judgment or justice in the Bible, it's more, or at least in the New Testament, it's more, think of it as righteousness and like wholeness and healing. Like how do you get that person back in a right relationship with God? Which is exactly that's what our previous pastor Maxwell taught a lot on. Is
We must have gone to the same class, I guess. The basic definition I use when I teach is righteousness means being in right relationship.
Yeah. It's not about being judged and being punished. Like that's the way we think of it, and that's very Greek.
Yeah.
But it's not the way it was intended.
Yeah, you're hearing a lot about with the pandemic how the stressor on kids, they'll act out in schools maybe more so than before because they really just don't feel safe and they don't really know how to process it, right? So they're so young, they don't have the words and the tools to be able to process things well, so they just do crazy things. And if you see that behavior as this is a bad kid who needs to be punished, then you'll behave that way, but it's not going to improve. They just feel more out of control and more unsafe.
Yeah.
But if you're able to, and this has taken me a long time, I think, to figure out, because I was always a rule follower. So it I couldn't really relate to people who were the class clowns and were not obeying authority.
Yeah.
Especially when authority was mostly on their side. But to hear about the teachers and parents and administrators who are able to get down to the kid and say, what's wrong?
Yeah.
What's going on? And then helping them work with that and deal with that. That's such a beautiful thing. And I really feel that's ultimately what God wants to do with us. And that's how God sees things. It's
Problem is that takes time, patience.
Compassion, mercy.
Looking for you.
Oh,
Well,
Hi.
hello.
thank you, Elna. Where's
Hi.
Daddy? Oh, okay. You sit here with me.
Yeah, we're almost
I'll
done.
find you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You get scared?
You're asking good questions like on judgment. Now you're making me, I gotta go home and study that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and like with the kids, like I like what you were saying. Can you
Can I
just
have that cookie when I was born? Can I have that cookie left in a minute?
later, okay? Can you let mommy talk for a minute? Thank you. Like with the kids, yeah, you're absolutely right. And then if you do treat them just with punishment, they grow up to that they still have never dealt with that, and then they grow
Right.
up to be the same kind of parent, and the cycle just perpetuates itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, the extremes are not let your kid do whatever you want and, punish them for everything that they do wrong. There's this whole wealth in between that we are trying to understand to help give us as adults and kids tools to deal with things, because for so long people didn't know how to deal with their pain, and so they just passed it on. And now I think you're hearing people talk about it more and more between mental health and self-care and therapy, of just working through that stuff so that,
Yeah. I can't remember his full name, Reggie something, but he did that interview, you read it, he did an interview with a former gang member, what's going on the streets of Minneapolis right now. And it repeats some of the stuff I already knew from several months ago. But one of the solutions that this gang member offered was responsible parents. And when I was Bram as the Bram treasurer, I met some irresponsible parents. just I would not just the word dysfunctional, but non-functioning families. They had biological children, but they really weren't parents. And and they were doing what they could to get by. And I'm not trying to again negatively judge what they were living and doing, but they were not healthy steps. It wasn't good.
Yeah.
And then the children would grow up, and I don't know what's wrong with that kid.
Right. Shocker, right?
Yeah.
Shocker.
But, and
Right.
yet,
Oh, I know.
and yet all of it was being laid out before them. And I felt bad when I learned that, on a more personal level. And then, not that everybody is that way, don't take me the wrong way. And there are some parents that are really trying, but they kept slipping back into their own patterns and habits because that's what they knew.
Yep.
It is really hard for an adult who wants to change a major pattern in their life to change it.
Yep.
It is really hard because the default is just to go slide back to where you were.
Especially if they don't have the tools, they don't know how. They never
No.
were taught. So they've lived this way for
All the
30, 40
above.
years.
Plus, there's nothing like there's no carrot in front of you. Why should I even try? Why should I even try to change because I got by this far, etc. I mean, again, each person is different, but it's just some people. You just talk about tools and training. Some people just don't have the capability. That's the other thing to realize. I mean, there's so many angles here.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pretend to know everything, but it surprised me, and I read in this article that this is a guy who just got out of the gang. He's out in the Twin Cities area. That one of the solutions he suggested was parenting. Responsible
Absolutely.
parents, and that's not the fault all parents, because I already know you can be the best parents in the world by all of our standards, and yet you can have a kid that grows up.
Well, and you can also have really good parents that are under extreme stress due to poverty and all sorts of other things that are outside of their control. And so I remember seeing a post that said mental health is also living wage, affordable housing, access to, those basic needs that we talked about. Because when people have those basic needs met and they're not living day to day in high stress, and can calm down enough to get to the point where they can learn something new, they can learn new tools. Because when you're in a survival situation, which can come from economic as well as mental and emotional things, you're not in a place to work on the tools to be a better parent.
No.
So create a good foundation for our communities, and then give adults and parents the tools they need to start to learn better behaviors, and then we can raise a whole generation of kids who aren't perfect, but at least they have some skills.
Yeah, some skills, and that's my one beef about early childhood development is that it focuses on the child again, who goes back into the home situation, and that is, So we should have more parenting class. Could have more parenting classes.
Yeah.
Or universal 6 weeks of therapy every year. Everybody gets 6 weeks of
That'd
therapy.
be amazing.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Free therapy for adults for 6 weeks, and then maybe insurance covers the rest. Here's one story that I read about recently I thought was a great example. There were two college guys that walked into a pet store, big burly football type guys, and there was a rabbit cage, and it said on the sign, "You may pet, do not pick up." And one of the guys opened up the cage and picked up the rabbit, and this person was watching it and going, "Oh, bad kid," right? Didn't read the sign. And the friend said, "Oh, it says, oh, you're not supposed to pick it up." And the guy looked at him, he goes, "I thought it said, pick up, do not pet." And then he paused and he goes, I read it wrong. And he goes, "I know you have that thing where words get mixed up. It's okay." So there was such compassion in that moment because everyone could have assumed he was disregarding the sign. And yes, some people do that. But in that moment, his friend recognized that there was a dyslexia problem. And offered him compassion and didn't make fun of him, didn't chastise him. And I thought that's the future. To me, that's the future, is where we're aware enough of the limitations people may have, whether it's physical or linguistic or whatever, that we have more patience and understanding. And when you receive grace, when someone says, I know you're just having a really hard time, you know, and Derek slowly learned about me that when I'm really stressed or overwhelmed, hugs are really good. And so I came home from the funeral and I was like, okay, he just gave me a big hug and I was like, oh, that's nice. There's just those little moments of compassion instead of, you know, why are you so stressed?
Yeah.
Stop being stressed.
Calm down.
Calm down. Because that always works out so well.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you for your insights. Next week we will jump into chapter 10, which is
The Good Shepherd.
lovely, and 11, which is Lazarus, which is awesome.